Very warm welcome to you all, to attendees, guests, and to the panel on this, the first of our webinar series called Life Cycle, in collaboration with Mills and Reeve and JLR. Good morning to you all. And thank you for coming. Thank you for attending. And I hope you enjoy the next hour. This webinar series is dedicated to analysing and discussing the issues and requirements that face sports people, entertainers, artists, celebrities, film stars at various stages of their careers, the beginning, during their career, and in fact, after their careers, in terms of planning for what is that equally important area of post-career life. This part one will be focusing on the areas of sports law, the family law, private client planning, real estate, which for most people is the biggest investment of their lives. And I'm very, very pleased, I'm delighted to have with us some great people, some good friends, and I will be introducing them to you very shortly. The format of this is very simple. I'll present you to everyone. We'll then look at their areas of specific professional interest, and we'll be feeding in some questions to you. So please do take the opportunity through the Q&A to feed questions in, and I will try as the co-host with Carol Kauser to try and get these questions addressed during the show. If we don't have time, obviously we'll come back to you later with full replies. Just to advise you that this show is being recorded, and it may be that we use certain clips to publicize and promote the future, the second show in the series, which is part 2 of Life Cycle, in which we'll be looking at other matters that include security, well-being, mental and physical, and the very important aspect of financial matters. So those are very, very interesting areas, and we don't have literary space to cover those this morning. That show will be on Thursday, the 20th of May at 12 p.m, and we'll be sending out details to you shortly. So again, thank you so much for joining us. My name, for those of you that don't know me, is Jose Romanillos. Jose pronounced not in the Portuguese way, but the Spanish way. I quote to you the old Mexican fireman joke about Jose and Jose, but I won't actually tell you the joke. We'll save that for another day. My agency was started about 4 years ago. We look after clients, sports stars, artists globally. We represent them. We work for them. We try and achieve financial business planning. We try to help them with their careers. We give them work. And we've been doing that for a few years now. And 2 years ago, we set up, in addition to the agency, a private members club called JL Privé, bearing my initials as the founder. That's a private members club, which was in essence a way of developing our network. And we now have branches of this digital and physical club in Guernsey, which is where I live now, Jersey, Gibraltar, Switzerland, with physical bases in Zurich and Geneva. We just launched in the Isle of Man last week. We have agents and hotel bases in all those places. And be careful, because we're coming to England very shortly. We're going to be launching in the United Kingdom in September of this year, with hopefully a plan to do what Columbus did and sail off to America next year. But that's enough of me. If you want to be bored even further by me, please drop me a line, send me an email, and we'll have a chat. Very happy to talk on Zoom and listen to your story. Right, absolute pleasure now to introduce you to our panelists. Great that we are working with Mills Reeve, who are one of the specialist law firms in the United Kingdom, based in the UK, but they have an international presence, obviously. And it's my great pleasure to introduce to you initially Carol Cowser, who is the partner. She is a partner at Mills Reeve in the international sports media entertainment practice. I've known Carol for several years, although strangely enough, we haven't physically met yet. So it's a bit of an odd one, that one. All our dealings have been remote and digital. She's previously worked with Manchester United Football Club. Hence, behind her, you'll see an appropriate shirt, and an international football agency. She is a Spanish speaker, and she advises sports media and clients in Spain, Latin America, and South America. So I'll say buenos días to Carol. ¿Qué tal? ¿Estás? Bien? Very good. Now, Carol acts on behalf of football clubs, the players, the intermediaries, on both domestic and international transfers and permits to play and move. She advises sports, media, and entertainment clients on image rights, and that's a world that I'm particularly interested in, the use and exploitation of those image rights of our players and artists, key in some ways to their development, as well as reputational issues. She acts on behalf of football clubs, players, managers, with the Premier League, the FA, UEFA, FIFA, and even the Court of Arbitrations for Sports. So she's a busy lady and has a vast wealth of experience. So Carol, thank you. Lovely to see you, and we'll be hearing from you very shortly. I'll move on swiftly to Allison Bull, who is a member of the Mills Reeve team, and her speciality is family affairs. She's part of their national family team. They've acted in lots of cases involving sports people from all types of sports, you name them, she's been involved. The sorts of cases are, some of them pretty difficult, and she's dealt with them. For example, Alison's given me a couple of examples: mediating with an unmarried father and his ex-girlfriend, sorting out arrangements for their child and financial provision for the mother. I mean, these are tough stuff. Domestic abuse allegations, injunctions, court orders for fathers so that his child could move overseas to live with him. This sort of thing, which sits behind the story of the sports people, which is so key to their lives and their personal life, how it impacts on their professional life, is absolutely critical. So, Alison, thank you for coming. And again, I haven't met you physically either, but one day. Move on to Charlotte. Hello, Charlotte. Good morning. Charlotte Shaughnessy works in the Mills Reeve private client team, and she has worked for a variety of sports and entertainment clients, and in fact, several footballers, cricketers, and superbike riders. I don't even know what a superbike is, but I can guess it's a bike with a lot of potential on it.
Yeah. My technical knowledge says it's just a very fast bike. That's all I know.
Yeah, good, cool. Yeah. So it's got more speed than my 49cc Honda, a Vespa, I suspect. So Charlotte has been advising on all sorts of issues that include the charity, giving and establishing charities. So I think, for example, the world of football, footballers can get a bad name for just being about me, but actually a lot of them aren't. So a lot of them set up charitable organizations, foundations, and you just have to look at what Marcus Rashford has been doing. That gives you a really good idea of what these guys and ladies can do and want to do. But although a lot of them want to keep it under wraps, a lot of them don't actually want to be known to be giving millions of pounds to certain beneficiaries. Charlotte's also been involved in image rights as well, setting up tax-efficient structures, and then cross-border planning, tax and estate advice on moving to the United Kingdom. So then that's really important, so that when these people sign up to come to the UK, there's the whole strata of things that need to be put in place. Often before they even move, you've got to have these things in place. Which brings me to my final guest. So welcome, Charlotte. Thank you for coming and joining us. It brings me to speak about when people move over, they've got to live somewhere. You know, you come over with your lovely wife and 3 children, you've got to live somewhere immediately. And our final guest is someone I've known for several years now, Stephen O'Kane. Thank you for joining us, sir. I know you're a busy man. You're selling more houses than I can imagine at the moment, so well done to you. But Stephen O'Kane is Director and Head of Sports and Entertainment in Savills, the real estate agency, based in Margaret Street in London. Though he's rarely there, he's whizzing around the world looking after his clients. Stephen has incredible portfolio of clients. To be honest with you, his space is global real estate, and he understands what the footballers, the artists, the singer-songwriters want in terms of their housing. And he understands what motivates them to make these purchases. So he's got the psyche, the understanding of what motivates and drives these people. He founded the sports and entertainment division in Savills, although if you look for him, you'll not find him anywhere, really, because he's all about discretion, very professional, very confidential, very private client. So, Stephen, thank you for joining us, and lovely to see you. And I'm now going to actually hand over, because you've had enough of me talking, I'm now going to hand over to Carol and say, buenos dias, Carol, again, and thank you. And would you like to sort of take the torch and run with it? Hello.
Buenos dias, gracias. Thanks a lot, Jose. So without any further ado, I'm conscious we've got a lot to cover in the rest of the hour. I'm just going to kick on. I think, first of all, touching on family. So Alison, obviously, you know, working in this sphere, clients are really conscious and about their confidentiality around their dealings. So is it possible to get divorced, for example, and actually keep that private?
Yes, basically it is possible to keep the vast majority of the arrangements around a divorce and separation private. The divorce itself, certainly in talking about English and Welsh law here, is a matter of public record. So the fact that someone has got divorced is public. But generally when people talk about the divorce, they're not just talking about the legal relationship and ending that, which can be done straightforwardly using an online process now. But generally they're talking about the financial arrangements and also the arrangements for any children. And so a concern for many of our clients who are sports people, high profile actors, actresses, musicians, is, as you say, to keep things private. And the position now is that accredited press representatives are entitled to attend most family court proceedings. So that is a big concern and a reason for trying to keep the discussions about financial matters and about children outside of court if possible. So there are really, I suppose, 2 different sorts of ways of dealing with this. And the first is where things are relatively amicable, or the separating couple will be able to, with the assistance of professional help, reach an agreement without the need for a third party to make a decision for them. And if that's the case, then either mediation or a collaborative type process is ideal. And that's where the separating couple will meet, usually together with a mediator, which can be face-to-face or online, but sometimes also separately on a shuttle type arrangement if they'd rather not be together, to discuss all of the issues, to be given legal information, and to try and reach a consensus about the level of financial provision and what should happen in relation to the children. If that's not going to be possible, and it's a relatively small number of cases where that isn't possible, sort of case where someone will not take legal advice or will not engage at all in a process, then the next best option really is arbitration, which is relatively new to the family law sphere, but is in effect a private court process. And that can be really, really helpful, much quicker, therefore much more cost effective, and completely private. And it can still end up with the same result, being an order that's enforceable in a court process. It is still necessary for the separating couple to agree to arbitrate. So you still need some level of consensus there, but there is a big incentive to deal with things in that way, when otherwise, you know, they'll be participating in a court process. And we've all seen many press reports about separating high-profile couples who have washed the entirety of their dirty laundry in public, and have also spent a vast amount of money on legal fees, into the millions. So, yeah, for those of you who are advising clients in this who are high-profile in whatever way, then I would say try mediation first, or a collaborative process. Otherwise, arbitration. The key thing is to find advisors who are going to be solution focused, and not the ones that you see often in the press for representing those clients in very contentious court proceedings. So a long answer to your question, Carol. Hopefully that gives those of you listening some information about that.
Yeah, no, that's great. So if it's possible, in a nutshell, you know, we hear a lot about prenups, and often the clients we're advising are you know, they could be young athletes or actors or musicians, perhaps at the start of a career or midway through, and you know that ultimately their financial position could change drastically over a relatively short period of time. So would you advise that prenups are something that they should be looking at, and are they enforceable?
The short answer is yes, definitely. And I usually say, when people ask, are they binding, which is the question that's always asked, is that at the moment in English law, they're as binding as they're likely ever to be. So I'd like to tell you the story of Katrine Radmacher and Nicholas Granatino, who are a wealthy German heiress and a French banker turned research scientist at a university. We don't have time to go into all of the details of that case, but that ended up with the Supreme Court giving judgment in 2010, and that in effect still is the leading law on the validity and binding nature of prenups. And what the court said in that case is that the court should give effect to a nuptial agreement that's freely entered into by each party with a full appreciation of its implications, unless in the circumstances prevailing it would not be fair to hold the parties to their agreement. And that, following on from that case, there have been many other reported decisions about prenups, and there's an ongoing debate about, you know, when is it not fair to hold the parties to the agreement. But having an agreement, even if it doesn't achieve the fairness aspect, will still limit the amount of financial provision that will be made if it's not fully upheld in its entirety. And in the Radmacher and Granatino case, the husband originally was awarded nearly £7 million by the first instance court. By the time he got to the Supreme Court, he was limited to the provision basically that an unmarried father would have achieved, which was a house until the children had finished their full-time education. Age 22 was the slightly arbitrary date. And maintenance for himself and for the children during that time, because he was a father. So it had a huge impact in that case. And by the time the children reached 22, he'd have been, unless he's saved from that maintenance, he'd have been left with, well, basically nothing.
Gosh, interesting case. So turning to, I guess, the international dimension, often we're dealing with international clients, aren't we? They may be, you know, residing in a country that isn't their country of birth. They could be married to a spouse that's of a different nationality. They could have, you know, assets all over the world, ultimately, couldn't they? How does that kind of complicate dealing with family matters, particularly, you know, in the event of a breakdown of a relationship?
Well, you know, a lot of the cases that we're dealing with now do involve actually quite often many more than even 2 jurisdictions. So, the first port of call really is to understand the international nature of the couple who are separating. Their nationality, or they may have more than one nationality, their domicile, which is a slightly different concept in family law to tax domicile, where they're habitually resident, and then when they're where they're ordinarily resident. We need to look at all of those different aspects, and then usually the first thing to do is to make sure that we're in contact with our best friend firms around the world in the appropriate jurisdictions, or sometimes we have to narrow the number of jurisdictions we're looking at to those that are most likely to potentially become engaged in any ongoing proceedings. Because the first question is, where are they going to be better off if it's a divorce situation getting divorced? It varies massively. London is known as the divorce capital of the world for a reason, but sometimes still England is the best place for the divorce to proceed, and it really does depend on the factual scenario that you're presented with a case like that.
Presumably both parties would have to agree to that jurisdiction, or is it a case of strategically one party would look to start proceedings in a particular jurisdiction?
It is definitely a strategic decision. They don't have to agree, but in some countries they do have to agree. So that's why it's so important to work out all the potential jurisdictions that could be involved, and also to find out whether there are any prenups, for example, whether there has been a choice of applicable law or of jurisdiction in a prenup or in a marriage contract. In a lot of European countries, couples always opt into a property regime when they get married. So there is already in place a sort of prenup type arrangement. That's not the case in England and Wales, but it's something that we have to think about. And post-Brexit, it's become really even more complicated. But at least the one thing that is now not so important is who is first in time to issue those proceedings. Because previously, where you've got more than one European jurisdiction involved, potentially, there was a race to be the first in time to issue, which is high stress and also not very good for family relations going forward, because particularly where there are children, actually, generally, families want to be able to maintain some level of civility and to be able to focus on the needs of their children. So having an all-out legal spat about which country the proceedings are going to be in is not a very good way to start sorting those sorts of things out. So now the position is as it was in relation to non-European countries, which is that it's a balance of convenience test, generally speaking. But there are some exceptions to that, but we haven't got time to go into the detail of that today.
Understood. If anyone's got any questions for Alison or any of the other panelists as we're going through, please just pop them in the question and answer box down at the bottom of the window, and we'll endeavour to answer those as we go through.
It is interesting listening to Alison on that matter. As an agent, we're trying to look after clients and try and help them not get a divorce. But I just wonder, such a stress for artists, performers coming into a new jurisdiction, and almost, and I've heard this, almost left alone to their own devices. They've got a wife who doesn't perhaps even speak English, children that they need schooling. And I often hear that there isn't the support network there in certain cases. They literally just land and they try and get... So... do you see that, Alison, that the network could be better at supporting them?
Yes, and I think from my point of view and the national family team at Mills Reeve's point of view, we only tend to get involved after there are problems. But if we are, for example, advising on a prenup scenario, which we could quite likely do, or a cohabitation contract, which is another wealth protection tool where you've got couples who are living together but are not married, and that's around the time when the couple are moving to England and Wales, then at that point that's obviously something that we will address with them, because it is hugely isolating for not just the person who's the wage earner, whether it's the sports person, the actor, whoever, but also for them and for their spouse, but actually it's isolating for both of them. It's unless they're at that, because we do work as well with families where they are just truly global, so they're not based in one jurisdiction, they live all over the world. Then that's a different scenario. They're much more used to that. But if it's, you know, if it's a young footballer, for example, moving to England and Wales, you know, it's hugely challenging, and actually being instructed to prepare some sort of agreement, whether it's a prenup or a cohabitation contract, if they're buying property in the country, then that is an opportunity for us to look at the overall package of support, which is something we're well used to doing, because the first thing I'll usually ask a client when there's a separation is, you know, what's your support network? You know, because everyone needs that. It doesn't matter who they are. You know, so it's tough moving to a new country, and it's even tougher when things don't work out. So yeah, we've got a lot of other professionals who we would call upon to try and help with that.
Sure.
It's a really good question, Jose. Yeah.
Thank you.
My final question for you, Alison, before we just take any questions from the attendees. In terms of, I know you've mentioned it, but obviously there are plenty of you know, people within the sports media and entertainment world that don't marry, they cohabit. What is the position legally in terms of a partner of a sports media and entertainment star? Ultimately, you know, if they've lived for a long period of time, do they acquire any rights? Is there such a thing as a, you know, common law wife or husband?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and one that we're asked often. And if I'm presenting a webinar like this face to face with people, I generally ask people to put their hand up to say, do they think there is any such thing as a common law spouse or not? And you know, the answer is that there used to be, but it was quite a long time ago, not since the Marriage Act of 1753. So the answer is basically no. There are some areas of law where a cohabitant has some additional rights, but generally speaking, not. And it'd be interesting to hear from Stephen in a little while about purchasing property here and how that's managed. Because even if you have a property that is purchased in the sole name, you know, it very often will be, you know, a footballer moving here, purchasing a property and moving the girlfriend in either at the time or sometime later. And whilst you might think that that's all fine because the property's owned by them, very often the girlfriend won't have their own resources, won't make a financial contribution to the property. Sometimes they do. And sometimes the footballer will make promises to the girlfriend about, don't worry, you know, you'll be fine. You know, it's this, we're living here together. This house is ours. You know, it's half yours. Don't worry about giving up your job, your home in wherever you are, and just come and live with me. I'll look after you. And before you know where you are, you're into a scenario where actually there's a proprietary estoppel that's been established. Obviously a very legalistic term, but this is a very complex area of law. There's nothing special about being an unmarried couple. You're in effect, it's like buying a property with a friend. And then you're into all sorts of difficulties. And the best way around that really is to have a cohabitation contract, because that's an opportunity to set out the rules from the beginning and also to advise the property owner about the risks. And from the other side, that the girlfriend who's giving up a lot potentially to move for financial security, but only while they're together, it can be awful for them when they find the relationship's over and they're left in effect with nothing. If they have children, then there's the possibility of getting financial provision for them as a carer, as happened with Nicholas Granatino. It's a similar sort of scenario as an unmarried parent, but that's limited. And when the children have reached the end of their education, then you know they're out with nothing. And in my experience, we've dealt with lots of these cases now. Quite often in arbitration, because that's a good way of resolving them when things do break down. And it is usually the mother still is not really inclined to make savings during the course of the child's education. And where you're dealing with a footballer whose earning capacity is limited in time, and for those who don't manage their finances as well as some others do, You establish a very high expectation of standard of living, and suddenly the whole thing comes crashing down. So,
Alison,
yeah,
sorry to interrupt you, but you, I suspect, are a mind reader, because we had a question came in about a minute ago on this subject. You've just answered the question. The question was, what are the rights of partners living with our? He represents footballers. What are the rights of partners living with our player clients in the context, particularly of property owned by the client? So you've just addressed that. Talking about cohabitation contracts and trying to get things down in writing. So thank you for that. Really interesting. We're probably going to have to move on. I suspect we could listen to you for the next week, but I'm afraid we can't. So Carol, would you like to? Thank you, Alison. Would you like to move us on?
Yeah, and I guess neat segue into real estate and to Stephen. So obviously, Stephen, you work for a very diverse client base. Would you say that, say, a footballer's approach to real estate differs to, say, a musician or an actor?
Yeah, I would actually. I'd say it differs greatly. I think it's a combination of a couple of things. The earning arc for most athletes, certainly footballers, is very limited. So the top earning sort of area is about 4 to 5 years, where they're going to be really earning their maximum income. Where if you look at a musician, actor, that earning arc is going to be sort of 10, 20 years, potentially even longer. And also some of the commercial opportunities they get are much greater than a footballer would, because a footballer essentially is they're structured around their club. So their real estate purchasing or renting decision-making is based on the location of their team or their training facility. And on the back of that, they then start to diversify into buy-to-lets and things like that that are in areas they know, or, a player, for example, will go up to Newcastle. Our advice to him would be, don't buy, it would be to rent close to the training ground, or something that works for you, because actually you've only got a 2-year contract or a 3-year contract there. So the stamp duty alone that you would pay on that purchase would cover that, in many cases, cover that rental period. And that's the biggest issue we find with footballers, is that they go into areas that, the price that they're buying things at is so out of kilt with the general property prices in those areas, they really struggle to exit. If you don't have any connections to that area or region, and you are, particularly if you're an international footballer, you are going to leave, be that to the MLS, be that back to Europe, wherever it is. So you're suddenly in a situation where you have to take a haircut on your property. So to your question, yeah, the dynamic and the motivations for purchasing property are very, very different. And with the sports entertainment guys as well, they will take a much more global approach. With the entertainment music guys, they'll take a much more global approach, where they're very strategic in their purchases based on their tax, their tax impact, family, or actually where the studios are, or where their long-term strategy is for what they want. So it's a very different approach that they tend to take.
And I know I've touched on it with Allison as well, but the need for confidentiality. Obviously, when your clients are buying properties, how do they manage, or how do you manage that process to ensure that ultimately the press, social media, isn't finding out ultimately where they live, or where they're acquiring properties? There's clear security concerns, in addition to invasion of privacy.
So there's a couple of things to this. One is, however easy it is to go on Rightmove or find a property, it is the worst thing that any of these guys can do. The reality is I deal with sports and entertainment clients every day. I'm not a fan. I'm not here to have a picture with you. I'm not here to have an Instagram with you or tickets for something. My job is to actually find the right property for you at the right price in the right locations, and be that trusted advisor on that decision making. Inevitably, what happens is two things really. One is, things get more expensive when people find out who you are, because they Google you. I know you've got this. So those distressed sellers, those people who potentially would do a deal, aren't going to do that, because they know exactly how much you're worth, or check you out, or do their research. So that's one. Two is, the moment you buy it, everyone now knows where you live. So the reality is when you're training, when you're shooting a movie, suddenly I know from your Instagram, from your social media, that you are now not at your home and your family are. And as you can tell, there's been some very high profile robberies recently, particularly with footballers. It's a real problem. So there's a couple of things we do. One is we do a non-disclosure agreement, a standard. So whenever we work with sports entertainment people, no one actually knows who they are or what they're doing up until the point of transaction. Even then, that's basically to both parties' solicitors structuring that. So it's very, very limited for who's involved in that. Secondly, if it's not their principal home, then often they will structure it in a vehicle to purchase that, once again, to protect their identity. So that may be an SPV, but once again, that depends on how their tax structure is or how their business manager wants to do it. And I think it's just discretion. The reality is we engage with a lot of security organizations, people like that, who can really give security reports of actually how secure is your property. Does it have a garage? What are your thoughts? If you do have a fancy car or a personalized number plate, can you hide that away? Because you can do everything right, but if you suddenly tell everyone you start doing Instagram photos, or people start telling people where you live, it kind of defeats the object. So we're finding more and more, a lot of our clients are very conscious of how they're perceived, and that perception from a branding point of view. Particularly the sports and entertainment clients are very, very conscious of their branding, and part of their purchasing and part of their global portfolio is really important to that. And the footballers certainly, it's just about the trusted network. It's about really limiting the amount of people that you deal with, you talk to, and structuring that in the correct way and giving the best advice. It isn't always to buy. In many cases, there is huge benefit to rental, because even if someone ever did find out where you are, it's very easy for you to then move that. So it's becoming more and more of a problem, and I think certainly social media has had a big impact on that. And it's something I'm talking to a lot of players about at the moment, certainly in football, of let's really structure this in the correct way. I appreciate you want to do some of this yourself. We can do that, but once again, let's do it in a very particular way. And then also it's talking about things after it. So it isn't just about the purchase. Actually, it's about, okay, so you want an interior designer. Well, what happens to the interior designer is suddenly you're being charged £200,000 for some furniture, which costs 50,000 or 30,000. Are the contractors going around to do the work? Have they been vetted? Do we know who your cleaner is? So all these things that we have, so we have all these functions and all this great network where we start drawing into that, because it isn't just about the property. Actually, the property is the starting point, but it's all the different things that you want to do within that property. It's really, really important that continuation continues from a non-disclosure element. And touch wood, we've been very, very lucky that we've dealt with some of the biggest names in sports, music, and entertainment, and none of these have come out. And that's because we're very, very particular. Even in our system that we use, it's completely ring-fenced. So even within my organization, people won't know who I'm dealing with. It will be my details. We'll do stuff, for example, to ask the owners to leave the property. No one will know that. So literally the car will drive up, the principal will go in, and then we'll get in, and no one will ever know about it. So we're very, very particular, and we've just got experience doing it. We've been doing 7 years now, so we kind of know what works and what doesn't work. So, if I was to give any advice to any sports, music, and entertainment, that is the number one thing you need to consider when making a property purchase. On buy-to-lets, it doesn't really matter as much because it's not your principal home, but your principal home, you really should avoid doing any social media, any Instagram, and you should absolutely be engaging with security consultants, probably outside the club as well, your own third party that you feel comfortable with, rather than recommendations from the club, because once again, we've had issues with some individuals in the club selling things to the press, making information aware. So that's certainly, I would say, prevalent in football, probably more than anything else.
I can vouch, thank you, Stephen. I can vouch for Stephen's service of total discretion, confidentiality, and very bespoke, because 5 years ago, I first met Stephen and his in their lovely offices in Margaret Street on their famous 7th floor, which is the VIP entertainment floor that very few people get to. And I had a meeting with several directors of Savills. They introduced this young man, Stephen O'Kane, who came in. Some of them didn't even know him, and he worked in the floor above them. It was that confidential. Sorry, just a little.
So, Stephen, obviously, if anyone's got any questions, again, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A box. But Stephen, have you seen your clients be affected by either COVID or Brexit to greater?
I'd say that my clients are absolutely not affected by COVID, Brexit, Trump, you know, the Euro crisis, whatever it may be. The reality is for the first, so it's two elements really. One is firstly earnings. So if you look at the sports stars, musicians, entertainment, it's only ever gone up. So the way their income is created, their wealth generators, certainly. So because of the background that majority of the people in the space come from, the first thing they want to do is buy a tangible asset. They want to buy a house for mum and dad, you know, auntie, grandma, whoever it is in themselves. And actually they've always drawn to real estate generally as the principal thing. What's happened in the last year with everything going on is I have music and entertainment, so music people who would generally be touring and now in their home for the first time, probably more than 4 or 5 weeks ever, you know, or certainly in the last 3-4 years. So they're suddenly going, okay, I either want to buy somewhere new, I want to do a project. So we're doing a lot of, you know, big extensions, planning, all sorts of stuff. Or actually, now's a really important time where I can readjust and find out what's important to me. And so let's have a look at our global portfolio. Do I need that place in LA? You know, I just sold something for 9 million and something for a music artist in New York. Actually, I'm really passionate about this, or I want to move out to the countryside, or I want to do this. So certainly it's been a really good opportunity to sit down and discuss what's the plan and what do you want to do, and really what are your motivations and what do you want to do with your portfolio. So we've done record numbers of transactions with people in that space. And once again, with the sports, it's very similar. And I you know, it's been a really interesting time with the players. We always talk about life after football, and actually what's your plan and what do you want? Why are you buying this real estate? And making sure that we've been spending the time for these guys to understand. I'm not telling you to buy something, I'm explaining what the benefits are to you to do it, but making sure you understand. So it's been a really unique time, but I've probably been never busier. I would say football generally ticks over quite normally. You know, there's not really too many highs and lows, but music and entertainment has just absolutely blown up. And so it's been a really interesting time. So I think the benefits, there have been certainly silver linings for that. And I think a lot of clients themselves, priorities have changed. I think families become more important. I've got a number of clients who are maybe probably not going to tour again. You know, they kind of just said, actually, I really appreciate this time. Other guys who have like, you know what, movies are great, but my real passion is my drinks brand or my football team that I'm buying or something else I'm involved in. So I think the dynamic has really changed. So I think it's been quite an exciting time with dealing with these people. And certainly we've been doing a lot more commercial conversations, restaurants, hotels. I'm really interested in buying studio space. So it's been certainly dynamic. So to answer your question, it's been a really difficult time around the world in real estate, but certainly for my clients that I deal with on a day-to-day globally, it's never been crazier. The big trend I've seen certainly in North America has been the movement from California to Austin, to Texas and to Nevada for tax. So that's the other thing that I've noticed, that tax has become a big impact on some of the decision making for real estate, which maybe it hasn't been as much in the past. And I think once again, that's because they've had time to sit down with their business manager, with their agent, with their tax advisors, with their lawyers, and really look at the portfolio and where everything sits. So, yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. So I'm conscious of time, Stephen and Carol, but before we move on to Charlotte, I've just had another question come in on this area. The question simply is, what do we feel as a panel are the current exposures? This gentleman is talking about football, but I think there's a wider story. what are the real big current exposures for our art, sports, entertainment, artists, clients? And I would answer that very quickly, and let's talk about reputation. I think reputation and the risk of losing it is pretty high at the moment. As social media gets wider and wider and wider, we're seeing more and more of these cases where your name goes, and unfortunately you can be the world's best athlete, but if you are then suddenly linked to some racist matter, religious matter, political matter, it can all go pop, literally, and very hard to bring back. I don't know what others think.
I think the branding, I think just on that point, I think is really interesting, where in sport, success is dictated by performance on the field, and actually with and the brand outside of that isn't necessarily is thought of as much, certainly from my experience. But I would see with my day-to-day dealings with certainly actors, they are very, very conscious at every point when they're in the public domain, they're a brand, and they understand that very carefully. And I think the one thing I have seen on that branding point of view is people have just been much more private. People are very conscious of, what does it say? I'm buying a £20 million house, I'm buying a £6 million house when my team's getting relegated, or the people at my club have been made unemployed, or my movie just tanked, but he's okay. So it's really interesting. So I think certainly from my point of view, from the real estate, that's also been a motivator of people being a lot more discreet, because certainly with football, it's that brand. What's your brand? What's the brand legacy? What are you going to do afterwards? How are you going to take that brand and then use that for your life out after sport? So I think to your point, that's certainly from my point of view what I see of it.
Yeah, I'd say one of the big risks for our clients is when they've been badly advised, or they're ill-informed on matters, and they get themselves into difficulty. So I think there's an education piece in terms of their knowledge and awareness of perhaps the regulations, or like you say, kind of the social media and the branding and the reputation management. But secondly, I think it's around the professional support team that they've got around them. And yeah, getting the right advice, really. Okay.
Shall we move on to Charlotte, Carol?
Yeah, absolutely. So Charlotte, are you ever too young to make a will or a lasting power of attorney? Obviously, with the clients that we're dealing with, they tend to be kind of the lower end of the age spectrum. And if you're suggesting to them, let's get a will in place, let's get an LPA, are you likely to meet a bit of resistance to that?
Quite possibly, yes, you would meet a bit of resistance, but it's a really good question, because it's such a common misconception that a will or a power of attorney is something you do once you hit a certain age. Perhaps you're heading towards retirement, and the amount of clients that come to us and say, right, well, I've just retired, so it's time to sort my will out. And I'm thinking, well, 30 years ago, you should have done this, really, but better late than never. So you're never too young to do your will, apart from obviously under the age of 18, you're legally too young, except in very specific circumstances. But as soon as you're of adult age, and with sports and media professionals, they're starting to make money very young. A lot of them start families quite young. And at that point, it's never too young to start planning for those families and getting your affairs in order for them. To give a bit of an example, if a young sports professional or film star or whoever it is doesn't have a will, and they have assets at their death, so they've bought a house perhaps, or they've just got a lot of money that they've accumulated, it's sitting there, and they haven't really done anything with it by that stage. If something horrendous did happen to them and they died without a will, then that could potentially be really problematic for their family, depending on what the circumstances are. So, for example, if somebody has young children and they die without a will, then they might think, well, it's okay because my estate would go to those children. But it would only be offering very limited protection for the children. So as soon as the children turned 18, they'd be entitled to that money outright. And there's nothing anybody could do to stop them spending it, giving it away, flashing the cash on nights out with friends, and all of a sudden it's gone by the age they're 19, 20, 21. If somebody isn't married but they're with a partner, again, that comes back to what Alison was talking about before, in that there's very, very limited or no protection really for unmarried partners, particularly where there's no children. So if somebody lives with a partner, they own the house but the partner doesn't have their name on it, then under the terms of their will, the house would potentially be going off to their side of the family and the partner could be left with nothing. If it's in joint names, then it's slightly different. And as Alison was saying, in terms of the partner giving up their lifestyle and giving up their own career and things, then they might have a claim against the estate, but that's so much more tricky than it would be if there was a will making provision for them. And it could potentially get quite nasty with family and so on. So it's potentially quite a big disaster if there's no will. Even in a fairly simple scenario, if somebody doesn't have children, they might have a girlfriend or partner and it's not quite that serious. But you have a lot of scenarios, for example, where young footballers in particular have been brought up by a single mother, not really had anything to do with their dad. And then all of a sudden, if they pass away without a will, their dad's getting half their estate and the mum's having to split it with them. So there's all sorts of scenarios that can come up if people pass away without a will. And a will, very much, we consider it as sort of a living document to be revised and updated and perhaps redone as you move on in life and things change and you get older. So it's not really a case of doing a will at age 20 and you're stuck with it. You can update it, you can update parts of it, you can completely redo it as things move on, and you very much should review it every few years and make sure things are still up to date as your career develops, as your circumstances change, and as you have children, for example. Lasting power of attorney is another really good thing to think about. And again, there's a real misconception with this, in that when people picture lasting powers of attorney, they picture sort of granny being taken down to the solicitor's office and signing things, and from that point she's got no control of her own affairs and people have taken it over for her. That's a really outdated concept, I think, and it's not the way it works. With a lasting power of attorney, it's essentially a document whereby the person concerned is appointing somebody to look after their affairs for them. And that could be their property and financial affairs, but also their healthcare and personal welfare decisions. And they're appointing those people to make those decisions if they get to a stage or if something happens to them, which means they can no longer make those decisions for themselves. And the idea is that you prepare the lasting power of attorney whilst you're fit and healthy and able to do so, and you're fully aware of what you're doing. And then it's put away, a little bit like an insurance policy, I suppose, in that you might never need it. But if something does happen, which means that you can no longer manage your affairs, or if you start to struggle to manage your affairs, then it's there and it's ready and waiting, and your family or whoever you've appointed can start dealing with your affairs for you. And again, if you don't have that and something happens to you, then it's potentially quite problematic, quite expensive and time consuming to get it sorted. Because if something happens and you have to apply for what's known as a deputyship order, which is a court order that people can apply for where there's no power of attorney in place. The first issue with that is that the person concerned has already lost capacity, so they've got no idea who would be applying for this deputyship order and who would end up looking after their affairs. Now, it might be their husband, wife, partner, and that's who they'd want. But it might be, again, a family member that perhaps they wouldn't have chosen. If there are no family members, they could end up with a professional. And a professional would 9 times out of 10 do a very professional job, but they don't know the person, they don't have the connection with them. And it's quite time consuming to apply for a deputyship order as well. Quite often it's at least a 6-month process, often up to a year. And during that limbo period, the person's assets are essentially frozen. So if they need to make provision for anybody during that period, so a partner, elderly parents, for example, anybody else that they're looking after, the family's really stuck whilst in that limbo period and you're waiting for an order to be obtained. So again, forward planning and getting things in place well in advance of when they're needed is always the way forward.
Understood. I'm conscious of time ticking on. I know we've been advising on family investment companies. Perhaps it's worth just giving an explanation as to what they do and what the benefit is of that to clients in this space.
Yeah, very much so. So a family investment company is really an alternative estate planning tool. And they developed probably about 10, 15 years ago as an alternative to a trust. So your sort of very standard estate planning, certainly in the UK in the past, was to put money into a trust and you'd name as beneficiaries of that trust your family members, so children, grandchildren, future generations, and whoever else you wanted to provide for. But rules around the taxation of trusts changed in 2006. And from that point onwards, you could only put a certain amount into trust without incurring an immediate inheritance tax charge of 20%. For an individual, that's 325,000, and a married couple, they can combine and put up to 650,000 into trust. And that's probably good enough for the majority of people with their estate planning. But when you're in the sort of arena we're in and you're talking to high net worth individuals, sports stars, professionals, then they're probably wanting to do a little bit more in terms of their estate planning and give more to their family. And that's where structures like family investment companies come in. So at its very simple level, it's basically just any ordinary company that is set up, and the shareholders of the company will be members of the family. And the usual scenario is, for example, mum and dad, one of them or both of them have the family wealth. They'll set up the company and they will gift money to the children, and the children will subscribe for shares in the company. So mum, dad and 3 children will all be shareholders. Now, because the money is gifted to the children rather than through any sort of trust, it doesn't incur an immediate inheritance tax charge. So there's no limit to how much you can give them and put into the family investment company straight away. And provided the person making the gift survives for 7 years afterwards, then it's completely outside of their estate for inheritance tax purposes. It's also a good way to give money to family members whilst retaining control. Because if you're giving money outright to kids, again, they can go off, they can do what they want with it. They can spend it on their friends, they can get into a dodgy relationship, anything can happen. But if you're doing it through the family investment company, mum or dad or whoever it is has got control of that company. So they would be appointed director. We prepare very bespoke articles of association, which is the governing document for the company, setting out what can happen with each individual's shares. So, for example, they've got no power to transfer their shares to anybody outside a certain defined class of family members or trusts. We write in provisions that can potentially help if a family member gets divorced, which Alison would obviously work with as well. But for example, we can write in provisions that devalue the shares if they're trying to be transferred in a divorce settlement. Similar provisions for bankruptcy. And any family member who's acquiring shares is signed up to a shareholders agreement. And under the terms of the shareholders agreement, you can include provisions like if you're going to get shares in the company, then it's a precondition that you have to enter into a prenup before you get them. And that's really good from an estate planning point of view, because it takes the onus off the children to go to their fiance and say, I think we need a prenup. They can actually say, well, look, you've got to, it's in this document, there's no way around it. So it's really helpful in that regard. Mum and dad keep control of the company, and it's future-proofed for future generations. So when other generations come in, they're all subject to the same conditions, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time.
Amazing stuff, Charlotte. That's really fascinating. Do you know what? That's actually news to me, and it's a shame that Severiano Ballesteros didn't talk to you 20 years ago about it, and he could have set one up, because his family, as we all know, went to war about his image rights and his inheritance. So really, really interesting. Thank you. Enjoyed that.
Good, good.
Have we come? I think we're coming to the end here. My clock is saying it's nearly the hour. Can I just say, well, I've just had a couple of other messages come in. One is from actually one of the sponsors from our next show has been listening. That's Philip Grundell from a company called Diffuse Global. And they are our sponsors, or one of our sponsors on the second show, which is next month. And they look at the world that Stephen in particular was talking about relating to property matters, security, cybersecurity, personal details, confidentiality. So Philip will be enlightening us next month on that topic. So thank you for that input, Philip. My thanks, I think, must go to all of Mills Reeve for organising and managing the show. Absolutely, really interesting. I've learned a lot. I don't know about everyone else. My special thanks to Carol Cowser for co-hosting. Thank you to Alison Bull for being there and sharing issues on the family. Charlotte and your family investment company. My goodness me, I might have to look at it myself. And then obviously Stephen O'Kane, Mr. Property, not just UK, but global. But anyway, that's my input. Thank you all for coming. The part 2 is next Thursday, the 20th of May at 12 p.m. I don't know if, Carol, you want to finish it off from your side?
Yeah, thank you everyone for attending. I hope you've got something out of it. Obviously, we'll follow up with some contact details if you need to contact any of us, want any further information. But yeah, it's been a pleasure to be here today and to chat through these sort of really current issues for our clients. So thank you.